I remember getting an answer to a question I had asked over and over again. When you ask for a big answer, expect a big experience. So I was alone in my apartment, and the reason I was alone is because that year I had decided to split up with my fiance, move out of our home, and split time with my daughter. I was 31 years old and my life had already fallen apart. I was not waiting for that whole midlife crisis thing. No. I was a girl on a schedule. So alone in my apartment, I had just finished a workout, and as I lie exhausted on my floor, something very interesting happened to me. I started crying uncontrollably. And when I mean uncontrollably, I mean to say that somebody turned on a faucet in my eyes, tears began to gush and gush and gush out, strange and unusual sounds began to come out of my mouth, and this went on for 1 hour, for 2 hours, for 3 hours, for 4 hours, for 5 hours, for 6 hours, and it was about at the 6th hour I started thinking, I may need to go to the hospital. And I think we've all had this moment, right? Like we're in dire straits, our life's falling apart, and then we're calculating like how we're gonna explain it to the actual doctor. 2 more hours went by, and then it happened. I saw an image of myself as a little girl, crystal clear. The girl who I had orphaned so long ago for being too sensitive, for feeling too much, and for being the one who would ultimately hold me back. My question was the question that every strong girl has at her core but dare not speak. Why am I so alone? My answer came in those 8 hours. It took 8 hours and over 2 decades to break me. Because from the outside, you wouldn't have known it. You see, I was the girl in high school who played 4 sports, I volunteered 5 days a week, and I had a job. I was the first in my family to graduate from college, and I graduated without even one single student loan. I was the kind of girl who could lose a guy or a friend in a second, and I was the kind of girl that most girls came to when they needed advice on how to be more strong. Out of college, I met the guy, I got the job I wanted, we had a kid, we bought a house, everything looked good, but nothing ever felt quite right. I had literally sprinted through my life, accomplishing much but never slowing down to recognize that strong girls finish last. And people all over this world every single day are buying into the lie that strength will keep you safe. I go to many schools these days and I talk to a lot of kids, and I have to tell you that I go to classroom after classroom, room after room, and I see myself. I see children who are not building bridges but building walls without missing a beat. And something we have to remember is that children like this do not just show up. Children like this are built brick by brick by brick. And these walls can be likened to a term in psychology known as identity foreclosure. And this is very common, happens to a kid when they take on their ecosystem and take on a particular identity and start foreclosing on other possibilities around them. So you might hear a young boy say something like, well, I'm a football player and therefore. Young girl might say, I'm a ballerina and therefore. I hear kids say much more nuanced things like, I'm not a great writer and therefore. I'm fat and therefore I'm weak and therefore I am strong and therefore. And my bricks were actually pretty predictable. You see, I grew up in the projects. My father abandoned my family. My mom was left to raise 6 kids by herself. And I remember certain things about my childhood. I remember going to school with holes in my clothes and kids making me very aware of that. I remember wondering where my father was, and I remember wishing I could just live in a place that was a little nicer. I remember getting really happy whenever I would get sick because that meant that my mom would tend to me a little bit more and spend some more time with me, and things in my mind would just slow down for a little bit. I remember amongst this chaos needing space so badly that very often I would go into my backyard and I would take my dog's igloo kennel and I would clean it out. And I would clean out and scrub out the smell of pee and dirt, and I would take a towel and I would lay it fresh in that kennel, and that kennel became my office. It became the place where I would dream and I would write and I would draw. But what I did most in that kennel was come to terms with the fact that I was a girl who was far too sensitive for the world in which she found herself. And I tried to push through, but I just couldn't. And then one day I had this thought: if I stay this way, then I'll die. So at 6 years old, before I could even really tie my own shoes, I decided to trade in my sensitivity for strength, to be like my mom, who never cried, who always pushed through, and who always sacrificed everything for us. We make these trades so easily when we're young. We trade in our hopes and our dreams because someone tells us that's safer. We trade in our ability, our liveliness, our happiness, and our play because someone tells us, you need to be more quiet. We trade in our passion and our ambition because someone tells us there are limits. And we listen. We listen, and we take these ideas into our adult life, living by them, breathing by them, creating habits around them, and we forget who we once were. Or worse yet, we come to the conclusion one day that we never really truly had the space to figure out who we were in the first place. And here's the really tricky thing about this decision. Very often, it works for a while. Leading with strength got me a lot of things. I was able to come out of my neighborhood, to persevere. I had great success as an athlete, and I don't say this to you to brag, but to show you that these choices, they're very deceptive. For instance, if you led with always being a victim, then very likely you got a lot of treats from that. Most likely people listened to you and you felt heard. People may have made excuses or concessions for you, so you got away with more. You see, these decisions that we make are always made with a purpose, and they'll serve you for a time, but they'll only take you so far. So it's time for us to step up and become the adults in the room, to become multifaceted, multi-layered human beings, and go back and make reckoning with that choice or choices you made so long ago. And just in case you're wondering, that's not easy. So, how do we unbuild? There are 5 solid steps that I took to remove my own bricks. And today, for the sake of time, I'll just share the first 3. Number 1, identify your bricks. Identify that thing that you've been leading with which no longer serves you. Once I identified that I was leading with strength and that I was stepping into my intimate spaces as strength and expectation, and that's exactly why they weren't working out, a light bulb went off. And I could identify the times where I was stepping in with this energy. I could identify the times where I needed a little bit of this energy. And I could identify the times where it had no business showing up. Number 2, own bricks. Own them. True ownership is actually very freeing, and I know that that sounds crazy because we're all so used to just running and sprinting away from our mess. Because I fell into this trap too. When I started this work, I sat back, crossed my arms, and went, well, why didn't anyone stop me? 2 reasons for that. Number 1, because I was accomplishing externally, and it seems that we'll all settle for that. But number 2, because no one could have stopped me. True ownership means saying this, stepping to the front and saying, that was all mine. I was the one who did that. My entire ecosystem could have been suggesting it to me, but it was my choice. I was alone because I had set it up that way. Number 3, heal bricks. Go back and say you're sorry to you. Go back and assure that little boy or little girl that you're here now. Talk to them, even if it sounds crazy. And just to close with you, I want to share with you a little love note that I wrote to that girl in the kennel. Dear Allison, feel the world. Feel the world deeply and embrace it. If you need to cry, cry. If you need to be held, come and find me. Do not be afraid to feel. Do not be afraid to break down and become stripped. For there will be times in your life that it is necessary for you to sit with overwhelming happiness and sadness. My wish is that you embrace your life. Thank you.